Hi, Music Man 82 here. If you're all like me, you love IPAs, you love the hops, you love the aromas, the flavors. Nothing is better than a big New England IPA that's 8 to 9% double dry hopped, you name it. It's all about the hops. If you're like me, you've also known that you drink enough of those beers in a row, it's a lot of alcohol, it's a ton of calories. And if you've ever found yourself wondering, hey, I wish I had that hop experience in a smaller beer, uh, you've gone out to the store and looked for low calorie IPAs and you've found them probably 4%, 4.5%, and you've gotten them home and they tasted like a Bud Light. Not hardly any hops at all. So in this video, I'm going to show you how you can, with minimal equipment, brew a very low ABV IPA at home. And the one that I'm brewing is between 2.5 to 3%. And this beer has a ton of hops in it. So I'm gonna show you how to make this exact beer. You can brew 5 gallons of it for less than 25 bucks. So if that interests you, keep watching and we'll see you in the video. Cheers.
Hey everybody, Music Man 82 here. I'm coming to you with a video today that is going to be shot over the course of a couple weeks. I'm doing a home brew today that I'll tell you about in a little bit, but before we get into that, I wanted to showcase this beer that I'm drinking right now. This is the Hopworks Urban Brewery Wishlist Hazy IPA from Portland, Oregon, and it is a beer that I just had for the first time this last week. I've had many hub beers in the past, and this one is probably near the top of my list from theirs. I've had some from there that I definitely didn't like, but when they do hazy IPAs, generally they have some pretty good beers. This one uses Australian Ella Cashmere hops. It's not a super huge beer. It's 6.9% alcohol, and definitely got a really good mouthfeel to it. Not too thin for my taste, but just been a good beer to drink. The number one rule when you are brewing at home is that you have to have a beer that you're drinking during the brewing process. And given that the brewing process takes a couple hours, generally it's more than one beer. So you may see me back in a little bit with another one. So anyway, the beer that I'm brewing today is a recipe that I developed about a year ago, and I was kind of preparing for my new career as a stay-at-home dad, and I was like, I need a beer that isn't super high in alcohol content that I could crack in the middle of the afternoon if I feel like having one that's, just going to be an easy drinking IPA. And I had done some shopping, out of the low alcohol IPAs, and I just didn't like the hops that any of them had. None of them had a true hop character to them, in my opinion. So I decided, well, heck, I've been brewing for close to 5 years. Let's try and develop something that will hit the spot. So I developed this recipe that you're going to see today. It comes out between 2.5% alcohol and probably 2.8% alcohol, so it's very low. IBUs on a beer that has that low of an ABV need to stay pretty low, because if you get too much above 30, it's going to get really, really puckeringly bitter. So you want to make sure that you keep the IBUs on the low end, and I'll talk about that during the brewing process, how to accomplish that. Now, so I'm a extract brewer. I'm not cool enough nor do I have the equipment to brew all grain yet, and there's also a lot more time that goes into that. So this brew is a really quick one. I can put it together in 90 minutes and have it in the fermenter, and then it's bottled about 2 weeks from today, and then it'll be ready to drink very shortly after that. So it's a quick turnaround. Also a very cheap beer because it doesn't have a lot of alcohol content. The dry malt extract costs, the yeast costs, the hop costs are very low. I can brew about 5 gallons for somewhere in the ballpark of $20 to $25, depending on how fancy I get with the hops. I think this is my 6th brew of this recipe. The recipe changes from time every batch I use it. There are different hops that I've used, slightly different yeasts. I've played around with the malts. The last batch I brewed used an amber malt instead of the Pilsen Light malt that I'm going to be using today. And they all turn out fairly similar, and other than the color, the amber is going to be a little darker. But this IPA, because it's so weak, my friend Mike and I are big Age of Empires players. We like playing Age of Empires 2. We have since college. After a long hiatus, he got me back into it, and it's become an obsession over the last couple years. And so one of the weakest units in that game is a unique unit produced by the Malay civilization at their castle, and it's called the Karambit Warrior. And this thing is quick, easy to produce, not too expensive, and it dies very easily. And so, because it's so weak, we were joking around one day. We should call this beer the Karambit after that unit. So that's the story behind the name. And I'm going to see what I can do when I put the entire video together, see if I can get some Age of Empires soundtrack to play on it. I know there's some remixes that people have done. So I'll do my best for that. So brewing the Karambit is a process. First thing I do is I take oats and steep those in the water as it starts to warm up. I generally keep my steeping temperature between 160 and 170. And then after the oats have steeped and given a good hazy color to the water, then I will add the malt extract. And the way I do it is I add the malt extract to a cold water and make kind of a slurry before I put it in the boil. If you've ever worked with dry malt extract, you'll know that if you put it over steam, it clumps together and it is really hard to break up in the actual the boiling pot. So what I do to get around that is dump it all into a cold water in a sanitized bowl, and then make sure that it's all mixed together really well, and then put it in the boil. And once that has reached a boil, then I will have calculated my hops and how much I need to do to produce the given IBUs that I'm going to be shooting for. And then near the end of the boil, I will put in a little bit of flavoring hop, aroma hop, and then a little bit of yeast nutrient. And then I don't have fancy equipment, so I will be filling up my bathtub with some ice water to cool the liquid down. And then once it's ready, put it in the fermenter, fill it up with water to the 5 to 5.5 gallon mark, add in my yeast, which you'll see me I'll pitch the yeast first, and then I'll put it down in the basement where it stays a good solid temperature. And within 2 weeks, and then I'll dry hop it probably 4 days before I bottle it. And I'll just throw in some hop pellets to give it a little bit more hop aroma. And then I'll show video of the bottling process as well. So it's kind of a lengthy introduction to this beer. I'll show some videos and time lapses of the brew as it happens. But anyway, cheers to a brew day. Have a good one. All right, so as the first step, I have put 1 cup of oats into this bag here for steeping, and I'm going to be watching the temperature and adjusting it. I don't want it to go too much above 170, so I'll be kind of backing it off as it approaches that. You can see the water's already turning a little bit of a hazy color. I'll keep kind of shaking it a little bit to try and get the oats to give off all their wonderful hazy goodness. Here I'm boiling water for pitching the yeast. So this is the water for pitching the yeast. I put it in a sanitized container, and we'll watch it. And right when it hits around between 85 and 90 degrees is getting really close to pitching the yeast, and I'll throw the yeast in it and stir it and let it sit there for a bit. So right now it's just kind of chilling, cooling off from being boiled. I boiled it for a good 5 minutes just to make sure everything was crystal clean with it. So that is the first step in the pitching of the yeast.
All right, so I'm going to talk a little bit about the hops that I'm going to be using. The bittering hop I'm using is the Australian Vic Secret. It has an alpha of 21.8%, and the higher the alpha, the more bitter your beer. So this is 1 ounce, and for the desired 30 IBUs that I'm going to be getting in this beer, I only need a ½ ounce of this in the boil for 20 minutes. So it's not going to take a lot to get that with that level of bitterness that I want. And then I'll probably save the aromas on this. It says clean passion fruit and pineapple overtones, which is what I want in an IPA. So I will probably be using the other half of that package to dry hop with later on in the process. The hop I'll be using at the very end of the brew is Citra, which is one of the go-tos for IPAs. And I'll be using this probably maybe half of it, 5 minutes left in the brew to give a little bit of aroma, and then right at flame out after I turn the stove off. This the other half will go in there, and this one is citrus, melon, gooseberry, passion fruit. So definitely a good hop for IPAs. So you can use beer recipe calculator apps to allow you to figure out how much your IPU is going to be. And once you figure out your IBUs, then you can adjust it. I could use a 1/4 ounce of the Vic Secret for longer to get a different flavor. But for this beer, I kind of like having a little bit less boil time because it keeps a little bit more of the hop aroma in there. So I'll be adding that once I get the mixture to a boil.
All right, so we are about done with the steeping process here. The water's pretty cloudy, and these oats are pretty soggy now. I'll be removing them shortly and squeezing out some of the last bits of haze that I can get from them. And then right after I do that, I'm going to be I sanitize this bowl and then fill it with cold water, and then I'll be taking my malt extract, just the single package of it for this low of an ABV beer, and then whisking it in to create that slurry that I'll then put in the pot, and then I'll bring that to a boil before I add the bittering hops.
So after I made the slurry, I put it into the pot, which I've returned to a high heat after keeping it down a little bit for the oats. And my goal now is to get the wort to a boil, and then I will add the bittering hops. So this is currently what it looks like. Now this is the critical moment of the brewing process when you're brewing at home on a gas stove. Gas is great for home brewing. The problem that you will have is this dry malt extract is pretty much the sugars that have been extracted from the grain. And if you're not careful and you let this pot come to a boil, the entire thing erupts and comes up over the top and makes a giant sticky mess all over your stove. And most brewers have this happen at some point in their life, and you only make that mistake once. And so this is where I sit and watch it like a hawk, and then as I start to see the level in the pot creep up a bit, I will turn the heat way down. And at that point, and then kind of I'll try and reach an equilibrium between the level in the pot, and then start to hopefully see the bubbles coming up that tells me it's boiling. And then I will add my bittering hops and start the timer, and then things will happen pretty quick because I only have a 20-minute boil for the.
All right, so we've reached the point in the boil where it's starting to rise. I've knocked it down a couple times, and it's starting to come up pretty quickly. And turn the heat down. This is that awesome time during the boil when, if you've ever been to a brewery on brewing day, you know that wonderful smell of the malt and the wort boiling, and it's just the best smell ever. So
now my whole house will smell like this for the rest of the day, and I haven't even added the hops yet. So I need another beer, some Melvin back into Haze doing it for me. So we are ready to add some hops. I could be super scientific and measure out exactly half of this, but we'll just eyeball it. Close enough. All right, I'll start my 20-minute timer, and then pretty soon I'll add yeast nutrient, and then 5 minutes left I'll add a little bit of Citra for some aroma hop, and I'm gonna get the bathtub ready for the ice bath. All right, so we're approaching 10 minutes left in the boil, and I've been stirring it occasionally just to make sure everything's mixed up well. So when I was first preparing this recipe, I was asking Craig up at Billings Homebrew Supply in Billings, Montana, you know, how do I make this really low ABV beer happen without it tasting really thin and gross? And he said maltodextrin is the answer. And maltodextrin is a sugar that does not turn into alcohol when the yeast is in there, so it gives you more of a mouth feel. So it feels like you're drinking a bigger beer than you would be if you were drinking just a straight 2.5% alcohol beer. So maltodextrin, like anything, will clump in the heat. So I've prepared a little slurry with, I use about 2/3 of a cup for a 5-gallon batch of this, and I'm going to throw it in there, and then mix it up really well. And then at about the 10-minute mark, I will also add the yeast nutrient. And what this does is helps the yeast do its job. And it's only a half teaspoon for a 5-gallon batch. And I started using yeast nutrients on one of Craig's recommendations a few years ago after I had a really bad stuck fermentation, and have never had any problem with it since then. So it will be a staple of my brewing forever, probably. So I just ran the bath, about ready to pitch the yeast, and we're gonna add the aroma hops here in about 3 minutes or so. All right, so the temperature on our sanitized water, boiled water for the yeast pitching, is now around 87.5, which is pretty close to where I want it for the yeast. So I'm just going to dump it in. There are very scientific measurements for how much water you should use. I've found it doesn't really matter. A lot of packets even allow you just to dump it on the wort, but I've gotten better results with pitching if I allow this yeast to sit in water for a little bit beforehand. Kind of makes a nice creamy foam that allows you to, it just feels like the yeast is already working rather than pitched into its new crazy environment. So we'll let that sit while the wort cools off in the bathtub here in a minute. So I'm going to be using Citra for my aroma hop, and I'm going to put in about half now with about 5 minutes left, and then put the other half in at flame out. Citra smells amazing. It's just one of my favorite hops. So in we go. And it's about half. I wish you could smell this right now. It smells amazing. All right, so I just finished the boil and added the rest of the Citra aroma hops, and I had filled the bathtub up with some ice water, and I'll be stirring this frequently to make sure as much of the wort comes in as possible comes into contact with the side of the pot so that it cools off as quickly as it can. It's about 180 degrees right now. I'm going to watch it for about 130 because I will be adding cold water to it. That'll bring the fermenter temperature down to right about where it needs to be to add the yeast when I top it off. So while the wort is cooling, I will be making sure that doing one final clean of the fermenter. This is an amazing fermenter that was given to me as a gift by my friend Rick, who is the head brewer at Stone Homebrewing in North Dakota. Used to be a brewer at Wild West here in Powell. He's an amazing guy and brews amazing beer, and so thank you so much for this. One of the things I will be doing is filling the water as I check it up to at least here to make sure that that there are no leaks coming out of here, because that would be kind of bad for my downstairs carpet. And then of course it makes it really easy to bottle this because you just connect the hose to here with the bottler on the end, open it, and it's great. So I'll be cleaning and doing one sanitation of this now before I get the wort in it. All right, so the wort is cooled down to about 130. I'm going to dump it in here. And top off the rest with cold water. All right, so I've topped the fermenter off to just over 5 gallons. And then I'm going to give it a vigorous stir to aerate the wort. It's really the last point you want oxygen interacting with it before the yeast comes in. So here's what the yeast looks like after it's been sitting for about 20 minutes. I'm just going to pour all of that in like that, and then I will close up the fermenter and add an airlock, and we are good to go. All right, lid is on, and this is an airlock. So what happens with an airlock is when the yeast starts converting the sugars into alcohol, it releases gas, which needs to come out somehow. And so you put this in here, and then it pushes this, the inner piece up, and starts to bubble, lets the gas out, but it also doesn't let anything like oxygen back into the wort, which is not what you want. So this is now going to sit at about 69 or 70 degrees for about a good solid 10 days, and then I'll add some dry hops to it and then bottle it on day 14. All right, so I finished the main brewing part of this. It's in a fermenter downstairs where it's going to hopefully produce lots of awesome gases that leak out the airlock and make my basement smell like a brewery for the next week, which is totally fine with me. So as I finish the cleanup, which is awesome, lots of sticky pots and utensils, I'm drinking one of my favorite beers. This is the Fremont Brewing Head Full of Dynamite. Now this is version 25, and I say one of my favorite beers. This beer, I've had probably at least 12, maybe 13 or 14 versions of this beer. This one's brewed with Citra Eldorado, and it's This one is not the top of the list. Some of them have been just to die for. This one is a little bit thin for the mouthfeel. I rated it a 3.75 on Untapped. It's not quite as good as the majority of the series. So it's probably down there with the 2 or 3 that were, don't get me wrong, they're still great beers, but there have been just some that are amazing. So it's always disappointing when you grab a 4-pack and you are looking forward to it and you go, it's not quite as good. But it's still a good beer. So I'll keep you posted and show you what happens next with the beer I brewed today. And we will see you in a few days for an update on how the fermentation is going. Cheers. Here we are about 24 hours after everything went into the brew kettle, and we have a nice fermentation going on here. It's been bubbling away since I got up this morning, and the whole basement smells like hops, so it is great. We will keep an eye on it over the next few days. Hey, I'm back with our dry hopping of the beer that I brewed 11 days ago. So generally when I put the dry hops in, I want it only to be about 4 days until I bottle it at that point, because the longer you let the beer sit on the hops, the more kind of grassy vegetal type taste you get from it. So I'm planning on bottling either Sunday or Monday, so this will be the perfect time to do it. I'm going to put an ounce of Citra hop in, and then the rest of the pack of Vic's Secret hop that I used as the bittering hop in the brewing process. So I'll be putting that in today and then bottling it in about four days or so. And there we go. So today is bottling day for the beer that I brewed a couple weeks ago, and first step is getting the bottles all sanitized. It takes usually about 50 bottles or 25 bombers to fully get a 5-gallon batch. So it's a long and lengthy process. First thing I do is fill all of them up with super hot water, let them sit for a little bit, and then dump them out. And then I'll add sanitizing solution to each bottle and let it sit for a little bit to make sure everything is clean. So I've put sanitizing solution in all the bottles and given them a good shake, turn them upside down, just make sure everything gets coated, and let them sit about 10 minutes or so. And then what I'll do now is give them one more shake and then empty them and make sure that I roll the bottle as I empty it so that all the surfaces get touched with the sanitizing solution. And then I'll give them a few minutes to let any residual solution settle to the bottom of the bottle, and then I'll give them one more final dump out to try to get as much of that out as I can. There'll still be some bubbles left in the bottle, that's totally okay. And then I will put on a funnel and then put corn sugar inside each bottle to help it prime so that we get some head on the beer when the bottles are opened. For each 12-ounce bottle, I use about a half a teaspoon, and then for each bomber, which is about twice as big, I use about a teaspoon. Sometimes I use a little bit more than half a teaspoon for the 12-ounce, but in my experience, it's proved to be just about perfect. So I'll be doing that after, and then I'll show you what I'm going to use to bottle out of the fermenter. So I finished putting all of the sugar for the priming inside the bottles.
And if any of you that are watching this are homebrewers, you probably know that this is the long, painful way to do this process. And I only do it this way because I don't have a kegerator, I don't have the kegs, I don't have the CO2 to just siphon it directly from the fermenter into a keg and then charge it up and then have beer on tap. Someday, it's a dream, someday. So I do this annoying bottle by bottle method. It's tedious and probably my least favorite part of the entire brewing process, but it works. And if you are just getting into home brewing, this is a great way to get your own beer at home and just have beer to drink. So the next part of the brewing process, I'll put the fermenter on the counter and I'll move to the floor, put a towel down to make sure, because things get kind of messy, so I don't get a ton of beer all over the floor. I have sanitizing bottle caps right here. Make sure you always sanitize these. I prefer the oxygen barrier bottle caps. For me, the beer tastes better longer down the road, and so I always make sure that I get those. The other thing that I have, because my fermenter has a spigot off the bottom, it makes it easy. I just hook some hose to it with this attached. This is a bottling wand. You press the bottom, beer comes out, you need to stop it, beer stops. I have a full auto siphon that I can use if for some reason I brew a beer where sediment has clogged the spigot at the bottom. But brewing this low of an ABV beer, I have been lucky the last few times that I haven't had that problem. So it's super easy to just come right out of the tank. So the one thing that I do have to remember to do is make sure I take the lid off a little bit, because if you leave the airlock on and start pulling beer out, you suddenly don't have any beer coming out because there's no air flow, so you can't actually get the beer to flow. And of course, the other really important thing to do during this step is to make sure that you have a beer. This is the last version of the Karambit that I brewed. This is the one that I did with amber malt, so it's a little bit darker in color than the batch that I'm currently doing will be. But this one actually I think has turned out the best of any of the previous 4 or 5 versions. I'm trying to lose count as to how many, but this beer is great. It's got a super big hop nose. I think I had Mosaic maybe and Amarillo on this one. This one I brewed here, I only dry hopped with Citra. I think, well, no, I put some Vic Secret in it as well. So it's gonna have a lot of the citrus notes to it. But it's, yeah, this is an easy drinking beer for a 2.5% alcohol. And so if you are watching this video and you have any ideas as to how I can make this process better, I'm always open for pointers from brewers with more experience. And it's definitely something, you know, when you're a home brewer, I can tell you that the guys that have been doing it for 15, 20 years, always learning new things and always trying to make their craft better. One thing that I always try and do is with my bottles, as soon as I empty a bottle, I make sure I rinse it really well with hot water, shake it around, make sure that it gets cleaned out really well, so that I don't have a ton of bottle cleaning to do with a brush or anything right before, and then making sure like things like hoses get rinsed out really, really well. The last thing you want is some little bacteria in something like this to ruin an entire batch of beer, because it can. So about ready to start the bottling, and then that'll be it until it's had a few days in the bottles to let the priming sugar work and build a little head.
All right, so the beer is all bottled. You'll notice that you probably couldn't see it in the time lapse because it goes by so fast. You make sure that you turn each one over a couple times to check for leaks and mix the priming sugar in. And then the leaks is the big part. If you have leaks, you're not going to get any kind of pressure in the bottle that will allow you to get the head on the beer. And I also poured just a little bit. So this beer is super hazy. This one might be the haziest version of this I've ever brewed. The Citra nose on it is amazing, and I am super excited to see what this beer tastes like. Generally, I crack the first one open in about 5 days, and then it's generally a little bit undercarbonated at that point, but I'm just too excited to drink it, so I do. So I'll be back with one final video showing you what it looks like in the glass when it's poured for the first time. So that's all for bottling day.
Well, at the end of all of the brewing process, the best part is getting to taste what you've created. I was really excited when I was bottling this because I poured a couple samples and it was super cloudy and hazy, and as you can see, I can't wait for it to fully carbonate. I always have to try them really early, and this one has actually carbonated in the bottle fairly quickly, and so I'm loving this beer. This is by far the best version of the Karambit that I've ever tasted. Mike was over yesterday and tried one, and he said, well, I said, I think it's the best 2.5% hazy that I've ever had. And he said, it's the best 2.5% beer I've ever had. So it's got a really nice Citra aroma to it and really good mouthfeel for such a thin beer. Definitely one that isn't going to last long. I'm gonna probably drink quite a bit of it very quickly because over time, a beer that's hazy like this will deteriorate in the bottle, so you don't want it sitting around. So anyway, this is the finished product. If you enjoyed this video, go ahead and subscribe to the channel, and hopefully we'll see you around for some more brewing videos and beer videos in the near future. Cheers.